To order. Mr. Lauer, the roll call, please.
Mrs. Merrill.
Present.
Mr. Steigel. Here. Mr. Arcuri.
Here.
Mr. Ball.
Present.
Mr. Berquist will not be here tonight. Unfortunately, Mr. Berquist has been diagnosed with COVID-19. Mr. Kozer. Here. Mr. Lewis.
Here. Would you like to rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First item of business is approval of the minutes from the regular council meeting held on June 22nd.
Second.
Any other discussion on it? In favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 6-0. Special reports, and we have several this evening. First one is the intersection study, Route 19 and Center Church Road intersection.
We're going to postpone that. This is hard to believe, but our traffic engineer is stuck in traffic in Murraysville. So he's going to be late.
All right.
If we can, we can get to that one.
We probably need a study there then, huh? Okay, the next item is the Park and Recreation Department update.
Yep.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Michelle.
As you know, I'm Michelle Harmel with the Peters Township Parks and Recreation Department. And I'm going to give you a brief review of the last year. I guess it's been almost a year since we've had our review with you. The Parks and Recreation Board met every month throughout the past year except for the months of March and April of this year because of the shutdown. We resumed meetings again in May through Zoom. So the things that they discussed in the past year include, for our projects, we had the Shelter 2 and playground replacement up at the top of Peterswood Park. That project is coming to an end now. Hopefully we'll be done here shortly. Another project that we've been discussing is the park expansion playground and Peterswood Park ADA improvements. That project is done being designed, and we're in the process of doing bid specs for that right now. That's also a DCNR funded project. And then the other thing that we've been discussing is the beginning of the development of Rolling Hills Park. So those were things that have been discussed. General business. I don't know if you guys got the outline here. I'm gonna jump down a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna skip the policies and do that at the end. But we've discussed, as you guys know, the use of the gym by the twirlers. Right now, they have been approved to use the gym, and we purchased 10 by 10 mats so that they can use that and have adequate space to do what they need to do. There's 2 of those mats. And with the current situation, they are cleaning those mats after each use. That is part of their responsibility. There was a request to do a fishing line recycling program at Peters Lake Park that was approved. Some bins that are made of PVC pipe were installed to put the used line in so that it doesn't end up in the trees or on the ground. Another thing that was discussed is kayak rentals. I guess there's a kayak rental business that is advertising at the use of Peters Lake Park. And the board discussed that. They had some concerns. But the biggest thing is they just can't advertise on the Arrowhead Trail like they were doing. Our haunted trail of last October, we had record-breaking numbers. The Parks and Recreation Board made special note of that. We had over 2,678 people through in 2 nights. And that was record-breaking by leaps and bounds, not just by a couple hundred. One thing that we discussed is the naming of the playgrounds. Right now, to identify playgrounds, what we typically say is the playground up at Shelter 1, the playground at Shelter 4. And so we discussed actually trying to get the schools involved in having a kind of like a naming contest. Obviously, we would bring those names to council and ask for approval, but we were hoping before all this started, like I said, to get them involved and name the playground so that it's actually easier to identify. We had a request to tarp the infield of Field 1 and We denied that request only because of the fact that those tarps are too hard to remove, and if some kids just wanted to go out and play pickup ball, or a dad and son wanted to go out and play catch, they wouldn't be able to remove that tarp to play on that field. So, there was a Boy Scout that attended our meeting. He was just there to fulfill his badge requirements, did ask some questions about park open spaces and park improvements. Sports associations. One thing that's discussed every month by the Parks and Recreation Board is the documentation. Pat asked me to make sure to mention that the documentation over the past year has definitely gotten better. Right now we're kind of at a stalemate just because many of the associations haven't been in session and haven't even been meeting. But over the last year, we have noticed great improvements with their documentation submission. The swim president was the only one that attended a meeting throughout the last year. He came in December. We did have an alliance meeting, which those definitely help in communicating with the sports associations. And our YES representative from the Parks and Recreation Board wanted to do some signs. He actually got money donated and purchased signs to try and encourage the youth exemplifying sportsmanship. So we have these signs which are now ready for us to post on the athletic fields. So it just says youth exemplifying sportsmanship is expected, so please let the kids play, let the officials make the calls, let the volunteer coaches coach, cheer in a positive manner, and enjoy the game. So we now have those thanks to Vince Rapepi, he's our YES representative. And we also had our organization meeting in January, like we always do. Dates and times of the meetings haven't changed, so everything's the same. We have the same chairman and the same vice chair. And then finally, the policies. 3 of the policies were discussed in the past year. That's the memorial program, the fee schedule, and the park use policy. Those were actually created and recommended to council over the last year. But over the last year, our township manager had charged us with trying to create a policy manual. So I went through and tried to dig out all of the policies that I could find that were in existence before me and during the time that I've been here, sent those on to the board for review. We've spent several months reviewing and changing and documenting. Now I have created a policy manual that the board has made recommendation to council on. You guys have received that, and that's the reason why I saved that to the end. After tonight's meeting, if you have any comments, questions, recommendations, anything, please send those to me. You can CC Paul if you want. If not, I'm going to send them to him anyway. So, but you can send those to me, and then since I will be leaving after this review to council, if you have any questions or comments that you wanted to discuss tonight, now would be the time to do so. Thank you for your time.
Michelle, I'd just like to commend you for doing that. I'm one of the people who was encouraging us to try to get some policies written and make sure we have everything documented. I think it'll make your life easier going forward when residents can look up something and kind of get the information. You may still get calls, but at least it'll give them some basis on which to act. So I commend you and the board for going ahead with that. You already got my comments, so
thank you.
We don't necessarily have to talk about them if you want to answer them and if you have questions. But thank you for doing that.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Can you just hold on this for 1 second for the next topic, and then we'll...
Okay.
Okay, the next item is the COVID-19 update. Chief?
We're going to let the chief start.
Oh, why would you do that?
Good evening, everybody. I hope all is well. So the last time I was here was June 22nd. I thought that'd be the last time I get to see you for a little while. Unfortunately, numbers have taken an increase, which is to be expected to a certain extent. Just the numbers between the 2 big zip codes of Peters Township, 15317 has seen an 88 case increase since June 22nd when we met last, and 15367 has seen a 16 count increase since June 22nd. Those aren't staggering numbers, but at the same time, that's a lot of cases in a short period of time. Now, what I will say is those cases do seem to be among the age group of what's 21 to 49. We're seeing a high success rate in recovery and a quick recovery in that age group, and with this next round coming through. And if there's a positive side to things, with a lot of the healthier individuals becoming sick with this, the overall death rate seems to be going down. Another thing that is to be expected with that. As far as PPE goes, we have some really good counts as to what we have now. For first responders in the municipality, we have 295 masks or above. These are in stock, not in service. 2,000 surgical masks, 6,000 medical gloves, 50 gowns. We have 20 half-mask respirators. With the shortage of N95s, we're actually using the half-mask respirators with N95 cartridges. It's actually become cheaper to obtain N95 cartridges than the mask itself. So out of cost and actually convenience, we've gone that route. And we're able to get those when needed. We have 50 pairs of the half-mask respirator cartridges. Expenses, thanks to Ryan. Ryan and I has kind of sat down virtually over the last couple days and tallied up what our expenditures are. We have a total since the beginning of our declared state of emergency, $12,288.39. And just like anything, we are hard and heavy practicing the back to basic stuff, wearing masks, protecting ourselves within the fire department and the police department and all emergency response facets. And when we go to personnel care facilities, or personal care facilities, we are taking all of the level 2 PPE precautions. As far as that goes, our responders are following what they need to follow. We communicate with the police department and with Mr. Lauer on a continual basis, and hopefully moving forward, we'll continue to have a good handle on this.
So in addition to the expenses that Mike has talked about, we've also incurred expenses related to personnel, either individuals who's had to stay home to care for a child, or people who have been off as a result of needing to be tested. So in terms of the expense for somebody being off to care for their child, that expense is about $4,800. For the collectively people who've been off to be tested, that expense is about $2,600. The thing to keep in mind is that under the CARES Act, these expenses, both the ones that Mike has described and these expenses we have for personnel, are to be reimbursed. For whatever reason, and I'm not quite sure why, Washington County does not have that program yet together. Our neighbors to the north in Allegheny County are distributing money to municipalities. The same is happening inside of Butler County. But in Washington County, that's not up and running yet. So where you're looking at approximately $20,000 in expenditures, the fact of the matter is these expenditures will be reimbursed. The other thing is that I do want to point out is that we are seeing COVID-19 getting closer to the people that work here, and we have a part-time employee, and if you could keep her and her spouse in your prayers. This person's critically ill in the hospital, has been in the hospital for a few weeks, and the outlook does not look good in his particular case. We've also had individuals who have gone, part-time employees who've gone on vacation, come back, but before they reported to work were diagnosed with COVID. We have a program that's being offered in the rec department, and we just got notification today that someone is ill and now being tested, and then it turns out that another participant, when we went and contacted all the participants in the program, has been diagnosed. So the thing that we're seeing is, there's more evidence of this. This is no longer something that we're talking about in the abstract. It's something that's affecting people here. If we have two issues where I am concerned about. One of them is in the rec center. Since the rec center is open back up, as we would hope, you have a number of people stopping in to play. Those numbers of people aren't huge, but all we are asking people who come through the door is to wear a mask while they're in the common space, the space that's occupied by our employees, as well as the areas before you get into the gyms. Unlike the situation in the library where there's almost complete compliance with that request, that is not the case at the rec center. And I think the reason why that's true in the rec center is who's coming through the door. You've got teenagers coming through the door wanting to do pickup basketball and things like that. And as we could probably all appreciate, they perceive themselves as being pretty invincible. And so that's a concern. The other one that's a concern to me is, and I'm going to be addressing our employees about this tomorrow. It's the summertime. People have vacations scheduled. Some of those vacations are scheduled in areas that have been designated by the Pennsylvania Department of Health as being hot spots. And while the Department of Health suggests that when you go to one of these places, it would be good to be separated for the next 14 days upon your return, that as a practical matter isn't enforceable, and I don't know of any municipality that's doing that. Having said that, what I want to do is provide employees guidance as to what they need to do to be safe, and also inform them as to which of these states have been determined to be areas of concern. One of the things that we have done, we've had one individual come back from vacation, and we have found a way for that person to work that keeps them not necessarily being in close contact with others. And my intention is to work with department heads to be able to do that going forward, to the extent that people choose to vacation in those type of areas. But outside of that, I don't have anything else.
Are there any questions?
Do we need to buy any more supplies since they're being reimbursed? This would be a good time to buy.
Yes, we are. Over the next weeks and months, we have plans to continue to procure those supplies. Like I reported before, some of our suppliers, our normal vendors, were taking orders. Even though some items were back ordered, those items will stay in effect. I don't know the exact date that CARE funding, or the CARES Act funding, is going to be reimbursable for. Mr. Lauer, did they give you a date as to?
No.
So right now we'll call it indefinitely, but the way that I understand it is the state of Pennsylvania has distributed this money to the counties, and it's up to the counties to have an account for where that money goes. They're the ones that's going to be on the hook ultimately to find out if it went to the proper places. So as Washington County gives us more information, we will without a doubt work to get as much money as we can back, and it's up to 75%, sir?
Yes.
Yes. So we'll continue to procure all the PPE that we need for now and the foreseeable future under this act.
What plan is Washington County not executing on?
There's under the CARES Act, as I understand it, the money has gone to the state to be distributed back to counties. Counties need to enter into agreements with the state on how they're going to administer that program. In Allegheny County, those checks are in the mail to the municipalities. In Butler County, people are being able to apply for that money. But in Washington County, they haven't gotten to that point yet. It's all under the CARES Act.
But the county hasn't apparently then executed an agreement with the state?
That's as best as I understand talking to the county administrator.
I will have a chat then. Okay.
I think the deadline to apply was mid-June for that funding. And
yeah, and
how much they got, I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
Chief Mike,
Yes, ma'am.
were you able to get involved with the program where you could disinfect the N95s? There was some information that came out from the county about that.
Yes, and we can be if we need to get into that. Our burn rate isn't such that we desperately need to do that. It does involve boxing and shipping items to another state, so it can be lengthy in its process. However, there is that procedure out there. That was widely used in the months of March and April when PPE wasn't available even in the hospitals. It was really, really big to have their N95s disinfected, and they would do so. I think there's a few companies nationally that are doing that, but it does take shipping your supplies out of state, getting them disinfected, and shipping them back.
And one last question. Are you fairly confident that all of our employees are trained and comfortable with how to use the PPEs? Not just your fire people who are in the police who are probably more familiar, but all the rest of the staff. Are you comfortable about that?
For the most part, yes. And what I think, where I find myself too, is I always have room for improvement, always get to, so we're still learning. And we take the opportunity, I think, as one employee or a group of employees to learn every day as to how long we think this mask ought to be good for, or continuing to practice social distancing. Listen, it's as we started to open things back up, we started to forget a little bit. And I say that even with inside the fire department, as we brought training back to in-person training, at times we found ourselves a little closer than we should have been, because it seemed like the weight was off our shoulders. This is a stark reminder that we need to continue those practices, social distance. We're going to continue training in person, but we're going to continue to do it safely. I think, for the most part, with the message that Mr. Lauer's given to all the employees through their department heads and down the chain, that the message is getting out. And from my perspective, I think we're doing a pretty decent job with that.
I have one other question for you, Mr. Lauer. If in fact we continue to have issues with visitors to Park and Rec, and it turns out that some of those cases are coming, more of those cases are coming through there, do you anticipate shutting programming down again?
I don't think where our problem is in the, even though that we had an issue with the class, I don't think that's where we have a problem. We have protocols, and people who sign up for those classes are willing to follow those. I think where if we can't get it squared away, I don't know that we should be opening up the gym for just drop-in play.
Right.
We're not asking people to do a whole lot. We're asking them only to wear a mask between the time you come in the door and you get to the gym floor. And so I have to find a way to communicate that to that group of kids so that they understand what the consequences are if they choose not to do that. So,
Thank you.
Has there been any thought given to installing certain systems in the ventilation at some of the public buildings, including the rec center, that would, clean the air, like, so to speak? Because I know some dentists and things, and they've installed these, and they're not expensive. They install them on their HVAC system, and I don't know if it's a light or it's just sort of like what they have at the hospital. When it goes through, it kills like a real lot of it. You know what I'm talking about?
It's ultraviolet, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a lot of money. I think he told me he had to buy a couple of them, and I think they were like $500 a piece, and he had somebody install them.
But it's on the order of magnitude of the air in the
that's what I'm
rec
saying.
center.
Those are huge buildings, so.
yeah, that air handling system in the rec center is large.
But I mean, the only reason I'm saying that is that, assuming that this current situation persists, there's going to be more people that will want to use it in the winter months, in the fall, when you can't go outside.
True.
And it could be just worse. And, maybe we should look into it at a minimum, try to be a little proactive.
And that's not a problem. We can do that.
You're particularly seeing recommendations against recirculating air conditioning and heating systems, which many of them are.
Yeah, I think that was an issue in a lot of the restaurants and so forth. They were finding that a lot of the recirculating air, despite being 6 feet apart.
See, and like at the rec center, that's a newer building, and the amount of outside air that comes in, regardless of whether it's the summer or the winter, is actually substantial. So that's the advantage of that system. Of this building, on the other hand, the amount of air that comes in from the outside is somewhat limited, and where it meets the code, it is not as you would in the rec center.
They also remind people regularly that these types of masks are good for 2 to 3 hours. And, people are using them for several days at a time, which completely defeats the purpose. Cloth masks that people use, or if you don't wash them, clean them every day, they're pretty useless too. N95 masks with side vents on them are pretty useless, period. So unless you're using them properly. So, people think they're being protected, and they're not. They need to learn how to use the equipment properly, as was suggested earlier. So, I mean, that would seem to me to be the next area of education that would be useful. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
All right, the next area.
Mundry's here, so we can go on
Oh.
to the
Let's see you sneak in there. Okay.
19.
intersection, yeah.
All right.
I read his report.
Yeah.
But we have them here.
Are you going to traffic study or traffic delay?
And Mike, we were talking, being stuck in traffic for a traffic engineer is not an excuse.
And, you know, I was stuck
not
out in
good.
Murraysville in your neck of the woods, so I want to blame that great traffic adaptive system they have out there. Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
Just kind of summarizing, staff asked me to take a look at Route 19 and Center Church Road. There was some, I don't know the right word's concern, but there was some interest in looking at that because of the new school, having a new entrance off the back end coming out onto Center Church Road. Wanted to take a look to see if there was something we should be looking at for when the new high school comes online. I'll try to be as brief as possible, and if I'm being too brief or if you have any questions, feel free to ask. One of the things we did was we took a 5-year accident crash study. We looked at crashes for the last 5 years at 19 and Center Church Road, and we found there's been 9 crashes at that specific intersection over a 5-year period. And, well, you know, I don't know how that feels for everybody else, but from a traffic engineering perspective, in the old days, it used to take 5 crashes in a year to say, hey, you need to start doing something to address that. And then also when we looked at the different types of crashes that are occurring at that intersection, there's not one specific type of crash. So it's not people, there wasn't 9 people pulling out of Center Church on the 19 having an accident. There were a variety of different crashes. So one of the first things we found was while there's 9 crashes over 5 years, it's not one type that we could say, hey, we need to do this to address this type of crash. So there's nothing that immediately needs to be done. So then the follow-up question from staff came, okay, what happens when the new school opens? So when we did the traffic study for the new school, we did not have a lot of traffic projected to come back here on Center Church and make left turns. But then as staff pointed out, you know, these are high school kids. You don't know exactly where they're going. And, you know, it's one of those things that, yeah, we did a traffic study, but, you know, it's hard to study what 16, 17-year-old kids in a car, where they're going right after school. So I said, okay, we don't think there's going to be a lot of people, but if you want to be proactive, every municipality has police powers that they can install a 30-day temporary traffic control. So I said, if you wanted to get out ahead of this, what I would suggest is let's do some counts out there, counts at 19 and Center Church, 19 and Willhaven, or Center Church and Willhaven, and then Willhaven up at Gateshead. Get some counts in the summertime before school opens, and then once school or whenever this opens up, we'll get some counts after it opens. But in the interim, if you wanted to do like a 30-day no left turn restriction from Center Church onto Route 19, because that's the concern that staff brought up. How many kids are going to try to come out there and make that left turn? We could do some type of temporary restriction, do some before and after data collection, very easy with traffic counters. We have cameras that count cars. And then take a look to see how many kids are going back there. And then at the same time, if we wanted to, we could try to work with the school district ahead of opening and try to say, hey, we can kind of control how the kids are leaving the school. The best solution would be to get them all to go down to the new traffic light at Rolling Hills Drive, or whatever we're calling it, and McMurray Road. That's really the best way to get them all out to a traffic light. That's the most controlled way to do it. But even though, you know, again, it's high school kids, even under the most controlled circumstances, you don't know how many kids are going to try to go back that way. So in summary, there's not a particular crash that we need to solve or address at this time, but if you want to be proactive, there's a way that we could do some before and after opening counts to see how many kids are doing it. And an abundance of caution, if council wanted to, we could look at doing something like a temporary 30-day no left turn from Center Church onto Route 19. And this was all just brought up in staff meetings and discussions about the new school traffic.
Yeah, I think
That's what I have.
I think council's a little sensitized to this because we've had 2 very similar crashes recently.
Right.
And while that may not be all of the crashes in a long period of time, they're similar enough that it raises our concern.
And Mr. Ball, I would like to just add, like, when you're looking at not just this intersection, but the entire segment, like PennDOT breaks their roads down into segments. So if you look at the segment from the traffic signal to the south at Old Oak to the
Right.
traffic signal to the north at Gateshead, you do see that there is a cluster. There's not one specific type of crash that's occurring, but there are a number of crashes occurring in that section. So there's a bigger thing going on here than just high school kids coming and making a left turn. But
I don't know what it is. We've had some road improvements on 19. I mean, maybe people are, maybe it's more open. I really don't know.
I think it's a combination of having that open center left turn lane and all the driveways, the open driveways that you have along there. There's just so many conflict points when you map it out.
So there's a lot. There's something going on,
Right.
and that's an obvious
Right.
point. I know that coming across, the Old Oak traffic light coming out of the shopping area on the other side of the street from Old Oak, I've seen some people do some silly things going across the street there too.
Right.
So, this isn't all by itself. This is, and I'd look at it as a cluster.
Well, and I think one of the bigger issues is almost everyone, at least that I see, who travels, if you're coming down Center Church, I don't care which direction you're going on 19, they're going that way, because if they go down Willhaven, there's a good chance that they don't get into the queue down there at the traffic light. So everyone just seems to prefer to go down Center Church.
Right.
Oftentimes you'll see one car down there trying to turn left, and you'll see another car come up on their right side trying to turn right. So, and it's always just a mess down there.
Yeah.
So the suggestion was to do something temporarily try it out for 30 days once the school opens, have a no left turn on Center Church, the turn on 19, and then actually back at Willhaven and Center Church having a sign telling people to turn right on the Willhaven to get up to the light. I know it's kind of an awkward intersection when you get up there, but it's a safer movement. And again, we would count that intersection too, because we don't want to take one issue and make another issue up there.
Well, that's exactly the issue, because if you direct all the traffic to Willhaven, then you're going to be stacking everybody up on that side.
And that might necessitate, there's something we could do with the loops on there to let it sit longer so it doesn't gap out as quick if people are coming out on Willhaven and Gateshead. It's just how would we address that concern? There's some
And
things
the
we
count
could do.
on Old Oak, you got to time that one in there too, because you get Old Oak back up and it starts to empty, and people turning right from Old Oak. This isn't very far from there.
Right.
So, you're going to dump a heavy string of traffic right onto that one.
If I can make an observation, I was surprised at the low numbers for the crashes. But it could be, for whatever reason, that they're not all the same. But one thing I also wondered about, and we should probably be sensitive to, is if we do start putting restrictions, we need to probably be in touch with the property owner of the shopping center there, Mr. Schwartzer, because I've personally seen people cutting through the lot. And if in fact what we do creates issues, we need to be sensitive to that too. I mean, maybe the crash data is not that high because people cut through it.
And I would agree, if we're going to go out and put some cameras to do some traffic counts, I think there might be something, if there's a specific people worried about people cutting through, we could put a camera and these are low resolution cameras, you can't see license plates or anything, it's just literally counting.
Just a question of counts. If it creates an imposition for him, then.
And that's what we want to do. We don't want to try to say we're fixing a problem and creating another problem, but that's definitely something we could also do with with those property owners right there.
The problem I see is that when you're doing the school counts, everybody's going to be driving to school because of COVID. I mean, I was at a graduation party the other day, and somebody mentioned to me about the school district taking a poll. They want you to drive your child to school.
Yeah. And my wife,
what good's having the before when the after skewed?
Right, and my wife teaches at another local school district, and that's the thing where they're talking about, do we tell high school kids we want them to drive? Back in the day, they used to restrict
you on the bus.
Right. Back in the day, we used to restrict permits for kids driving. Now it sounds like they're going to want to give out as many as they can. So that's what I'm saying. We did a traffic study for the high school, but that number might be conservative now. We don't know until we see what the situation is once we get to the school opening. So that's a good point, too. We might have more kids driving than we thought were going to drive.
Right. Then you're going to do something, and then after hopefully this COVID thing lessens, might not be as bad as what those numbers indicate.
Right. And that's something we could keep looking at, too. If the restrictions
That's what
come
I'm saying.
down and
I
they say they go
I
from...
think we're aware of the situation and the potential, but, I mean, how many accidents? 9 accidents?
9 over 5 years.
I mean, it's...
And those are reportable accidents. They're-
Right, and again, let me clarify. Reportable accidents are one where the police show up and there's been some kind of damage.
Right.
If it's just a scrape, even if the police show up and it's just a scrape, that's a non-reportable accident.
Oh,
These are
okay.
reportable accidents where there's been significant damage to the car, or someone needs towed away, or God forbid, something else worse happens and EMS shows up. So a lot of those non-reportables are not in this data.
Mr. Curry, if I could just clarify one thing, though. In the case of the Peters Township School District, they're not encouraging people.
Well, that's the way it was relayed to me
Okay.
from the people that I was talking to.
No, but my point was going to be they have surveyed people to find out the answer to this question, because I think correctly so. It's going to change how many cars are on the road, and it's something I want to talk about a little bit later. I think it may create a challenge for us. So.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to speak for the school district, but I'm just relaying what was relayed to me from
That's how I interpret
a bunch of parents.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, very quickly, Waters Township update.
In your docket are a series of pictures that were provided by the contractor down at the site. They are making progress on the building. It's starting to. What's that?
I think, isn't he in the lobby?
I don't know.
Not yet.
Oh, sorry.
So, the building itself is taking shape both inside and out. They are in the process of accepting reservations for spaces. Ed was told that they have 40 of those spaces already with people on a waiting list. Their intention is to be done in March, and they seem to be on target to do that. So I don't know what else.
Paul, I thought when they submitted the original plans that the entrance of the parking garage was going to be right off of Valley Brook. Did they change those plans? Because I thought originally they had called for...
What was in the back?
It's
It's
you
all
wrap around
around.
the building.
Is it wrapped? Okay, maybe I remember wrong then, because I thought originally they were supposed to come right off.
It goes around, there's a driveway around the back.
For you, Ed, the road where you turn off your Fryer to go into the back, which is where the traffic, I assume, is going to go, that's pretty narrow. I mean, how wide is that?
24 feet.
Really? And, well, maybe because it's all tore up, but I mean, it seemed awfully tight in there.
It's supposed to be 24 feet. We haven't measured it, but it should be 24 feet.
Yeah, it might be. It just looks very narrow to me, but...
Anything else on that?
Drive it in there, so.
Just a quick question, 2 things. Can you remind us, how many parking spaces in the garage? Somebody asked me and I couldn't remember.
90 plus.
90 plus?
Yes.
And then we continue to get comments from people who are not happy because there is no turning lane there, because the traffic, even with the construction vehicles, is backing up on Valley Brook and Pryor. And I know that we voted to waive that. Is there going to be any kind of consideration for a turning lane at some point?
We haven't waived it. What we have done is to make it part of the traffic improvement fee capital program. So it will be one project amongst lots of
Well, we waived
projects.
having them pay for
Yes.
it at the time, so maybe I should rephrase that.
I have to say, not one person has said anything to me about that. Where I hear the complaints, that big pool of water that forms at the bottom of Fryer, it's like that deep. They're like, why can't you get rid of that? I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't go anywhere, it is.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, the next item is audience comments, and we are still in the mode of not having live audience comments, but accepting them rather as written comments to township staff, and they will be presented at the meeting, and shared with council. Do we have comments, Mr. Lauer?
Yes, there are 3 of them tonight. The first is from Dr. Karen Warner. Monica, are you taking feedback from the community on potential aquatic center? I do not know the specifics, but I would like to share my affirmative support for the aquatics center effort and also advocate for a year-round aquatic center that would allow lap swim every day of the year for residents on a fee-paying members. Has the committee considered giving Peters Township residents the options of becoming bond members, where we pay an initial fee to gain access to the facility, which secures a family bond access to the facility, and then a yearly use fee for the bond holding family member of the township? Rose Garden Pool Association does this, but they are not open year round. I know you personally do not support building the aquatic center, but you represent me, and I would like my input shared with the committee. I am not able to attend the meeting Monday, or I would also come. The second comment is from Mr. Thomas Fisher. My name is Thomas Fisher. I live at 876 Bebop Road. My phone, we'll skip his phone number. I'm a retired 37-year resident of Peters Township and live in this same house at this address the entire time. I have also served 72 years of age and in handicap with a spinal cord injury. I would like to have the following concerns discussed at the Township Council meeting. A new development has been approved off Sugar Camp Road that is right behind where I live. I'm concerned about the traffic volume and flow that will impact where Maria Drive intersects with Bebop Road. I understand that the new development is supposed to connect to Maria Drive. The source of my concern is that this will increase the traffic flow on Bebop Road and add to the already dangerous speeding on Bebop Road. The posted speed on this section of Bebop Road that I live on is 35 miles per hour, which means the speed limit cannot be enforced until speeders exceed 45 miles per hour. This speed is extremely dangerous for the young children and handicapped senior citizens that live in the area of Bebop Road. I would like to have the speed limit reduced to 25 miles per hour on this section of the road, as it is already on an adjoining residential section of Bebop Road. I have another concern about the swimming pool being proposed for Rolling Hills Park. I'm opposed to the building of the swimming pool since I believe it will only serve a very small portion of the township population and would also cause an increase in the tax load paid by residents, as well as exposing the residents to future operating costs and large maintenance costs. And then the third is a comment from Wendy Bowes. The turning lane that was the condition to build a nursing home was totally ignored. It was an ignored misunderstanding from the start whether it was Friar or Valley Brook where the lane would be built. It was a condition to build. Whether they were responsible for paying or not, a lane was needed. Yet no stipulation for a setback for a lane was made, which says council made no attempt to pay attention to the neighborhood as they ripped down our corner entry, which should have been a turning lane space. But there was a full understanding by council that the lane was needed from the start when the PennDOT study was done, let alone when the business begins as a nursing home. Council knew, yet the condition was ignored. If I were a township builder at Brookwood or elsewhere, I could point to this, whatever you want to do, precedent. Wait for accidents, see the traffic back up. We have a taste of trucks at the Waters home holding up the corner, and it affects Valley Brook traffic. Our single homes require large setbacks, logical 1/2 acre lots, but the nursing home has no setback, as if it is downtown. No rules for now, 5 stories placed. They cheated to be 5 stories, and council was lazy not to demand an adjustment to the corner lane. Friar suffers, so does Valley Brook. Nagging again for a lane, even if it means they are required to cut down a corner of the home. And that's the 3 comments we have tonight.
Well, I just wanted to comment that I did speak to Mr. Fisher about the Bebop Road matter, and I tend to agree with him. I mean, I don't see why that road isn't 25 from East McMurray down to Valley. I mean, there's houses there, there's children across the street, you know, he's elderly, there's other elderly people in the neighborhood. And, I mean, I quite frankly don't see any reason why that's 35.
Yeah, he is, Mr. Fisher also spoke to Mr. Steigel, and both Mr. Steigel and myself have a recollection of asking PennDOT to look at a section of Bebop Road, and I thought it was this, but I can find no evidence of that. And so if council wants and authorizing me to do so, I can have PennDOT do a study on that section of the road to determine what the appropriate speed is.
I thought the section we had them look at was the section up in front of the park.
We did do that.
That's what I thought.
But if you want this section to be studied,
Well,
we can request PennDOT to do that.
I'll lend my voice to that. Mr. Fisher and I also spoke, and I can see the merit in his recommendation, and I really can't, to me, see the appreciable difference between where it's 25 and where it's 35. There are homes that face frontage on there. There are roads coming out. You know, I think it would be worth asking, so I would hope that we could ask them if you'd be willing to pursue them.
Just as long as he understands that it's a PennDOT decision, it's not our decision, but it's, yeah. Oh, okay.
But, I mean, I know, Mr. Books, you lived on that neck of the woods. I mean, is that...
A little comment on that issue. Frankly, I don't understand why the end of the road is 25. No one, myself included, does 25 mile an hour through that zone, unless there's a police officer parked up in the...
Where their business is.
Exactly. Otherwise, everybody's doing 45, 50 mile an hour. The question is, how many accidents have we had?
Which is one thing.
In my mind, today's vehicles, their brakes, their tires, the rest of this means that some of our speed limits are obsolete. We actually should increase speeds on some of our streets, my humble opinion.
Okay.
Well, I still think we should take a look at that.
And what would happen is PennDOT will do a study.
I don't know what PennDOT will do about it, but...
I don't know either. They have warrants that determine what the appropriate speed limit is. What that request for a study is, they're going to come out and determine whether or not that road meets those warrants.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Muddy, maybe will chime in on this, but if they do the study and they find that the speeds are greatly above the current speed limit, they have the ability then to raise the speed limit then. That's how I understand it.
That's correct. Yeah.
Do you think that the potential installation of the roundabout will have a factor in whether or not they'd be willing to reduce the speed coming towards that? Because it's technically 25 in one side. Would they reduce it?
That's a good question.
I don't know.
I can say typically on a roundabout, they wouldn't reduce typically on a roundabout, they wouldn't reduce the roadway speed limit. There's usually a warning sign saying a roundabout's coming up. It's designed for X miles per hour.
Well, that's why I wondered.
Right, but they typically wouldn't change the upstream road for a half mile ahead of that to that speed. It would still be, if you got to that one in, what's that crazy double one they have out at 84?
Thank you for the
I mean, that thing's designed 25, but the speed limit's still, whatever going into it. So that's, and just like to your comment, the criteria that PennDOT uses for speed limits is kind of old and antiquated. It's based on the 85th percentile speed. They'll run out and use a radar gun or tubes on the road and measure speeds. And if the 85th percentile speed comes out to 50 miles an hour, they're going to need another reason to try to lower it. They're going to come back to you and say, hey, we could actually raise the speed limit based on the data. So their criteria is very outdated. There's not a lot of robust criteria on roadway type and, hey, it's residential and things like that. They're limited in their criteria.
Okay, well, we're not going to redesign all the road speeds tonight, so I think we understand that.
Do I take it the consensus of the council, though, is
fine, ask them.
to look at the road?
Okay.
Yes, that's fine.
Unfinished business, there is none. New business, ordinance amending Chapter 440 of the Peters Township Code of Ordinances for the purpose of defining accessory buildings, accessory structures, as well as eliminating watercourse and drain permits.
So item A and B are really related to each other. The ordinance, the first ordinance under consideration is amending Chapter 440, which is the zoning ordinance. When we had the public hearing on this, we pointed out that what it's doing in part is dropping reference to a water course and drain permit. That is not a permit that we issue. The second thing is it's amending the definition of accessory building to include accessory structure. And one of the things that came out of the discussion with council was that in addition to the items that were called out as examples of accessory structures, that they thought there was a need to be able to cover things like solar panels and other things. So what we did was amend it to include, as an example, freestanding mechanical and electrical equipment. And the idea being that it's not like your air conditioning unit that's attached to your house. It's something like the solar panels that sit on East McMurd Road that are sitting out independent of the house. So with that, it's my recommendation that council adopt ordinance 852, amending chapter 440 of the Peters Township Code and Ordinance for the purpose of defining accessory buildings and accessory structures, as well as eliminating water courses and drain permits. I know Mr. Simmons is here. He had contacted Ed, and I had an opportunity to have a discussion with him. And Mr. Simmons, of course, can speak for himself, but the concern is, how does this impact agricultural buildings? And as I explained to Mr. Simmons, the requirement to getting a permit comes out of the Uniform Construction Code. It doesn't come out of the sections of the Township Code that we're speaking of. And then the Uniform Construction Code, which is adopted statewide by the state of Pennsylvania, has an exclusion that eliminates the need for building permits for agricultural buildings. So that building type would not, if you had an accessory structure on a farm, it would not require a building permit. And I think it would be confusing and inappropriate in either one of these ordinances to create what appears to be an exemption from the fee for the permit, because it would imply that a permit is needed. And I think that's only going to create a confusion for farmers and township administrators somewhere in the future, because that just isn't the case. There is no permit required for those structures, and the township does not have a record of requiring those. But Mr. Simmons is here, and he might want to.
Paul, the type of structures that you're saying are exempted would be things like pole barns or greenhouses? And
all agricultural buildings.
Would there be any value in adding that to the whereas part of it, whereas Peters Township follows the UCC codes related to agricultural? I mean, would that be any?
You can. I can tell you those whereas clauses do not get incorporated into the code. I mean, they exist out there on the ordinance, but they don't get incorporated into the code. And like I said, I think it's a mistake to in any way imply that a permit is needed for an agricultural structure, because we don't even if we wanted to do that, we don't have the authority to do it.
Oh, I appreciate that. I was just trying to think.
It's outside of the domain, so why include it in any sense?
It was just a
If it
question.
conflicted with another statutory enactment of the legislature, this wouldn't take precedent. So I agree. I don't see a reason to do it.
Well, not only
Okay,
that,
it was
if
just a question.
you include that, then we also got to include every other potential use that's exempted by the UCC.
And there's lots of them.
Right. So let's just.
Okay, so that would.
Well, that's what I mean. There's all, there's all kinds of stuff.
Any
Would
other
Mr.
discussion?
Simmons have some comments he'd like to make?
Yeah. I sent you a letter saying that I was asking for that. I felt that, especially greenhouses, we use greenhouses
on a weekly basis to cover, in the spring, to cover plants and protect them. I mean, to expect them to have, to get the permit, it's not so much the permit, the cost of the permit, it's the design and all that. That's where you get expense. But as Paul said, they explained to me that there's these other laws that supposedly protect farms from that. So you would not want to put the language in there that says farms are exempt. Well, I have to say that history has proven to me, unfortunately, that what you say, when you say that, it does not turn that up. And I am only bringing up these historical things to show you that this is what my perspective is, because this has happened to me before. For about 3 to 4 years, I listened to council members, staff, and many other people involved here told me, Bob, the township will never ban drilling from your farm because there are other laws that protect landowners from that. Just exactly like what you're saying to me now. There's other laws that protect me. Well, you ban drilling from my farm, and it cost my family millions. Another example is the taxes. For 2 years, I've been battling my taxes on my farm here in Peters Township. My Peters Township property taxes went from $17,000 a year to $34,000. I have been told countless, so many times by all kind of people, government people, Bob, your taxes will never go up because you're protected by the state of Pennsylvania by clean and green. Well, it just isn't true. So you have to forgive me for not believing when you tell me that there's other laws that are going to protect my farm from things like this. And for the life of me, I cannot see what putting a little bit of language in there that says farms are exempt is going to hurt anything. It doesn't imply anything except that farms are exempt. And if your intentions are that farms are exempt, I don't see why you can't put a little bit of language in there for that. And if you won't, then it just kind of says to me, well, farms are not exempt. And someday, somewhere down the line, somebody's going to read that ordinance and say, well, geez, you're putting up greenhouses, why don't you have the permit and all that, all this other stuff. So, as I said, forgive me, I just don't believe that statement because it just has not proven to me to be accurate. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Simmons, just so you can have this, this is the section of the Uniform Construction Code that exempts agricultural buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve ordinance number 852, amending Chapter 440 of the Peters Township Code of Ordinances for the purposes of defining accessory buildings, accessory structures, as well as eliminating water course and drain permits.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? In favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 6-0. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll also make a motion that we adopt ordinance and amending Chapter 195, establishing permit fees.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? In favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, next item, approval of the Pemberley Manor Phase 1 final plan as shown on drawings prepared by Engineers Incorporated dated April 23, 2020 for Miranda Homes.
So on December 16, 2019, Council approved the preliminary plan for Pemberley Manor. The proposed plan is located on 30 acres of land near the intersection of Sugar Camp and Proby Road. This, of course, is a piece of property that is adjacent to Peterswood Park. The proposal is to look at this in 2 phases. One of the things that's a little bit unique is that they're asking for approval of each individual phase tonight. The reason for that being is that at least one of the phases will probably need a joint permit from DEP, and that that may take them a while to be able to get. But the two phases, the first phase is the section up towards Sugar Camp Road and along Frobe Road. And then it's shown on the drawing that's in your docket that shows Darcy Court, as well as the lots along Frobe Road. The second phase is in the back end of the plan, closer to the park, and it is the phase where there'll be homes that are on larger lots and a more standard size house. And this is where that connection then will occur back into the park. These are renderings of that you saw in the preliminary plan for the types of homes that Miranda intends to build there. These are the standard size homes. And then there are a series of patio lots, patio homes that are represented by these. At their February 13th meeting, Peters Township Planning Commission reviewed the final plans 1 and 2. The Planning Commission recommended council approve the plan subject to a series of conditions. Those 15 conditions are listed in the manager's report. There are 7 conditions that are still pending. So, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't know your name.
Pat Cooper with Gateway Engineers.
Gateway Engineers is the engineer who's worked on this plan.
Yeah, that's a good summary of what they're proposing. We appreciate township staff and everybody working with us to get to this point through these times, but hopefully we're on our way to getting our final permits and can start construction towards the end of this year.
Discussion?
I have a question. This is for Mr. Zook. If we approve both phases, right, they're not required to complete phase 2, are they?
If they start it, they're required to complete.
Right, but if we approve phase 1 and phase 2 and they do phase 1, they could stop, right, not complete phase 2, correct?
They could.
And so we wouldn't get the benefit of why we approved this was in part to get the connection to the park, right? How could we ensure that?
The bulk of the grading is proposed to be done in one phase. What Miranda owes the township is the grading and some storm sewers. And then the township will be taking over the pavement portion of that.
Yeah. And in phase 1, the Bruni Road is being, they're showing it to be extended back to the edge of their property. And we can work this into the development agreement to make sure that this grading is done back up into the park at that point in time to make sure that occurs so you don't have what you're suggesting.
Well, that was one of my concerns.
Yeah. You can make that a condition and we'll include
No, because I'm not voting in favor.
Oh, okay.
Because I voted no for the project, so I have to be consistent.
Just to update you, Mr. Lauer might not know, but the DEP informs us we don't need the joint permit. We need a different type of permit.
Oh, okay.
It's just a complicated thing. Miranda Homes certainly plans on completing the project. If they would buy the land at this cost and only do phase 1, they would be, that would not be a good sign.
I'd like to ask for a clarification under number 12. The conditions talk about the applicant shall investigate a potential solution to roadway runoff from Frobe onto proposed lots along Frobe. I'm concerned about the investigate a potential solution. What assurance do we have that something will be put in place since we've had a number of issues related to runoff and stormwater management that we've then had to assume?
The township observed that there could be an issue here because if you look at the contours on the existing conditions plan, it appears that water sheet flows from the south across Frobe Road onto this site and through the site.
Sure.
Our opinion is that there's a berm on the side of the road. Currently, all the water is flowing down Frobe towards Sugar Camp intersection. we've said if that's not the case, if we are, by developing the lots along Frobe, if it increases the amount of runoff in that direction, we will work with them, put in some inlets, something to correct it. I personally don't think it will be an issue, but we, Miranda says we will relook at this during construction to see if we think we have changed the runoff characteristics on Frobe Road.
I wonder if we could get that in writing.
I believe we have.
Well, I'm just concerned because there have been situations where things have been installed and all of a sudden they don't work anymore. And again, there are a lot of homes that could be negatively impacted, not to mention that road is notorious for flooding and for other issues when the weather is bad. So, if that, it's concerning to me that a solution wouldn't be required rather than left sort of ambiguous.
Well, I just don't know if there is a solution that would be required. That's the issue. But it is in writing that we will.
But what we can do, if council wants, is we can amend that pending requirement to say that we'll investigate it, and if it's determined by the township that there's a problem, that the developer will be responsible.
I would like that wording.
Yes, and Miranda is agreeable to that.
Mr. Lauer, on this parcel and this development, were we reliant on anything relative to a sewer line service through the park property?
Yes, they are going to extend the sewer line so that, in fact, it's coming off down here somewhere, so that we're going to get rid of the holding tank that we have right now.
Is that a phase 1 or a phase 2 element?
Well, I think it's going to be in phase 2 because it's coming off the sewer line that services these homes. But I don't know any way around that. You have to get the infrastructure in for this street to be able to get to
the
that.
issue is we have to eliminate that pond. If I can walk over here.
Sure.
There's an old farm pond right here. And we have to eliminate, if you jammed up a little creek, eliminate that, get this road over before we can get the sanitary sewer over to the side. And this is the permit that's holding up.
Are you reminding me that in that farm pond, there were some critters or fauna that somebody in the state was concerned about?
No, that was actually down towards the substation.
Further down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Other discussion? Motion?
Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve Phase 1 of the Pemberley final plan as shown on drawings prepared by Gateway Engineers for Miranda Homes, LLC.
Is there a second?
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
5-1. Okay, next item is approval of Pemberley Manor Phase 2.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve the Pemberley Manor Phase 2 final plan as shown on drawings prepared by Gateway Engineers dated April 23rd, 2020 from Miranda Homes, LLC.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. In favor?
Aye.
And both of those approvals are subject to the...
Yeah, it's subject to all the
unfulfilled pledges.
Okay, in favor, opposed?
Nay.
Okay, 5-1. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Approval of Brookwood Place Apartments, number 1, final plan as shown in drawings prepared by Spirit Land Surveying dated June 5, 2020.
So this is a re-subdivision of this plan, taking into account the specific locations of the party walls between the townhouse structure. So these are under construction. They know where these walls are at this point. And so all this plan is doing is creating lots for each of the units.
Okay.
So it's my recommendation that Peter Township approve the Parkwood Place Amendment number 1 final plan.
This is
So moved.
second. A second. In favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Approval of Juniper Woods Plan lots, revised easement plan is shown on drawings prepared by civil and environmental consultants dated May 13th, 2020.
So one of the things that happened in the Juniper Woods plan is that at some point there was an error that in terms of what the existing topography was and what showed on the approved grading plan, which resulted in changes to the grading out on the site. It didn't change lot sizes and configurations, but what it did do was make it necessary to relocate where certain utilities were located. So what the plan that's in your docket shows is that they're vacating all of the easements on the plan that was recorded and re-recording a plan showing the easements in the locations where the utilities now are located. So it's my recommendation that council approve the Juniper Woods plan of lot revised easement plan.
Paul, is this plan also showing, no, it's not showing the difference in the road widths, is it?
No. The right of way is the same.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. But I'll make a motion that we approve the Juniper Woods plan of lots revised easement plan as shown on drawings prepared by civil and environmental consultants dated May 13th, 2020.
Second.
Is that subject to any planning commission recommendations? Or were
There's
there
two
any?
of them.
Yes, and both of those have been completed.
Okay.
Okay, is there a second? All right, discussion.
I have a question. I'm sorry to bring this up again, but when they say they're lowering the pad elevations, it always goes to my mind about the water runoff. So are there associated adjustments with berms or swales or any of that other stuff that is required? And are they taking those into account? Because again, I don't want to create a situation where there's going to be a basin effect and we're going to be talking about this in the future.
The answer is yes.
Okay, good.
Okay. Any other discussion? In favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Ordinance amending Chapter 410 of Peters Township Code of Ordinances regulating parking in parks, township-owned open spaces, and Arrowhead Trail parking.
So as we discussed at the last council meeting, we would like to be able to return to having parking down at St. Petersburg. Having spoke to the owner, what we want to be able to do is designate spots that permit trail parking and spots that prohibit trail parking. To be able to do that and to be able to enforce it, we need to provide for that within the Township Code of Ordinances. So what this does is give us the ability to designate spots in parks, in open space, and most importantly here, in parking that is being provided along Arrowhead Trail. So this would be the same ordinance that exists within the parks right now with regard to parking on the grass and things like that, and it would establish a fine of $50.
I'll make a motion that we approve ordinance number 853, amending Chapter 410 of the Peters Township Code of Ordinances regulating parking in parks, township-owned open space, and Arrowhead Trail parking.
Second.
Discussion. In favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 6-0.
Mr. Chairman, before we move from this, may I just ask a question? And I could bring this up under miscellaneous, but since we're on the topic. When we first started talking about this and the owner closed the bridge, he referred to a handshake agreement that we have with him. And when we talked about memorializing so that we can do the signage.
And we're going to do that.
Okay, so that was part of my question.
Yes.
So concurrent with this, there will be a memorialized agreement.
I don't know whether concurrent since this is going to go into effect, but yes, we are going to work out an agreement with Mr. Courtney to have a formal understanding of how this is to work.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Set a date for public hearing for proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance as related to the regulation of signs.
The sign ordinance has not been reviewed by the Planning Commission. It's also been distributed to businesses in town through the Chamber of Commerce. Both Mr. Zook and I believe that it's ready to be presented to council at a public hearing, and we'd like to set the date for that to be at our next council meeting on July 27th.
Okay. Alrighty. All right, next item would be payroll and bills.
Mr. Chairman and fellow council members, the majority of the checks in this run were for routine payments based on approved operating and capital expenses, and there were more refunds for programs and shelter rentals. Of note, despite the 90-degree temperatures, Mr. Herson is thinking ahead and has purchased $75,000 worth of salt, rock salt. Makes you chilly just thinking about it. We also just paid almost $5,400 to have the tennis bubble removed. I've reviewed the bills and the pay report and move they be approved for payment.
Second.
Any discussion? In favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 6-0. Correspondence. Anything to discuss in here?
No.
Okay. Minutes. Anyone want to discuss any of the minutes? Okay. Moving on to miscellaneous.
Rolling Hills Drive. Mark.
Why did I guess that you might want to talk about that?
So I guess first I just wanted to give council a brief update. You know, I'm sure you've all driven East McMurray Road and you can see some activity starting to encroach closer to the road. What you're seeing right now at the site is Liberoni's currently engaged in relocating that stream that we got the DEP permit for. So I'd say that's probably 2/3 of the way done at this point. We're waiting for the culvert to come in that will actually take Rolling Hills Drive over that stream. So you'll see they have that excavation done. We're waiting for that culvert. Right now, they're also, where all the utilities are going to come into the site to eventually service the park, we're starting to bring those utilities into the site now because they cross that stream, and before we finish that off and get all those environmental treatments in, they want to get the water, gas, communications, power under the stream and get it up into the site. So you're seeing that occur now. I would say that before the end of the month, you'll probably see some trees starting to come down adjacent to East McMurray Road in anticipation of starting to build that roadway embankment there that will take East McMurray off of alignment. And so that, I would anticipate by the end of the month, you'll start to see some drastic changes in the landscape down there. That's the update. One of the things we wanted to talk about, as you're aware, we bid the job out in February before we had all the permits. We typically don't like to do that, but in this case, our hand was kind of forced by the schedule that we have to live with. You know, we did that with the anticipation there would not be any showstoppers, and there weren't. You know, we got the permits not until April. The one thing that did change from the time we did the job to the time the permits were approved is there was some E&S, some erosion and sedimentation control regulations that changed and some additional treatments that the Conservation District, the Washington County Conservation District wanted. So that change in scope is going to result in a price increase from Liberoni. Exactly what that is, I don't quite know. We're still trying to work through that. I can tell you, like order of magnitude, it's probably going to be in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. The Conservation District asked for a couple more, they call them filter sock sediment traps, truck wash rack, some additional rock construction entrances, you know, some standard things that just added up over the course of the job. So the one other thing that we've asked Liberoni to do, and it was a concern not only from us but from the Conservation District standpoint, is we had hoped to get the stream relocation done earlier in the year. You know, we were hoping to start this job in April, but we didn't get the permits until the beginning of May. Of course, we have 95-degree and sunny weather right now, which is not conducive to growing grass. and getting the stream relocation, getting the vegetation established. So we had talked to Liberoni about a plan to try to water the site during this incredibly hot period, to just, so the plants didn't die and whatnot. So the best thing that we could come up with was, they have a hydroseeder on site. They can fill that up on a daily basis and water the site. It takes 3 guys about an hour to do that. So we asked them to start doing that last week and track their expenses. And it works out to be about $300 per watering. So, last week during the heat, we spent about $1,300. Now, luckily, we got some rain this weekend, so hopefully at least we'll get some, rainstorms that'll keep that fairly moist. But, when it does get dry, we'd like to water that.
And what you got to understand, this isn't an aesthetic thing. This isn't wanting it to turn green. It's the direction of the Conservation District and DEP that unless grass is established on that slope against the new stream as it's being relocated, you can't proceed with additional work, and the stream can't be moved to its new location. So this becomes a critical path item, getting grass to grow.
Yeah, and Mr. Lauer is correct. That was one thing that we discussed with the Conservation District, is that they're really concerned about us making the tie-in at the upper end of the stream relocation to finally make the diversion of the stream and put it through the new channel until all of that's established reasonably well. So that's why we're trying to do this watering effort. So what Liberoni and I have agreed to do is probably when we're at the end of this phase, which would be the stream relocation phase, see what they have into the watering costs and put a number to the ENS. And the reason we don't have a final number exactly yet is some of the ENS features, particularly the rock construction entrances that the Conservation District wanted us to install. In looking at the plans, some of them don't make perfect sense, and I think that Liberoni and I have agreed that throughout the course of construction, some of these may not have to be installed. So rather than charge us for them now, let's see kind of as construction progresses how many construction entrances we need to accommodate, and we'll go from there. So I just wanted to make council aware of that. At some future date, probably a month from now in August, we'll be coming with a change order for some of these ENS cost increases. But other than that, we're still on schedule. The traffic poles have been ordered. That was kind of the critical, one of the critical points in this process. So they're on order. They're expected to be in October or November. So that should give us time to get that signal up and running by the end of the year. So.
Could I ask a question, anticipating comments from people about the trees? Do they anticipate taking everything out, or because that will actually become, the side of the road will become the berm between the road?
Correct.
Will they be trying to be selective, or are they?
No, well, because it all has to come up at the same time. So even though there's a berm in there, the elevation's coming up in between those roadways. So
okay.
Pretty much everything between the existing road and the new road's gone.
Heavy sigh.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Anything else?
We've already talked about the Park and Recreation Policy
Right.
Manual, and that will be on next meeting's agenda for action. This upcoming Monday, we have interviews for the possible consultants for the Rolling Hills Aquatic Center. One thing that I would ask is that if any member of council has an issue or question that they would like to make sure that the firms address, if you let me know what that is, I'll forward that to them to make sure that they're prepared to be able to discuss that. Mrs. Merrill had suggested that perhaps it might be appropriate to have a joint meeting with the Peters Township School Board prior to school opening. I told Mrs. Merrill I would bring that to council for you to decide. I broached this subject with Dr. French, and I think the question is, what's the purpose of the meeting? And then so that she can relay that to the school board, and then being able to find a date that works for everyone. So
Well, the purpose was my reaction to seeing the information about the surveys related to people, parents being encouraged to drive their kids, them not being sure what's going on with that, about how they plan to open. I just think that for my purposes, it would make sense for us to get an update from them as to what they anticipate as far as actual opening schools and then actually opening the high school. So school in general and the driving, because it's going to definitely impact the roads and the traffic. But then second, what their anticipated accuracy is with opening in January of 2021 and what kind of potential problems that might mean. And then I'm sure they'd like to know if we're going to have the road done. So we should probably, that was my
The one thing that Dr. French offered was that if by some chance the school board was not interested in getting together to get this many people in a room, she would be more than happy to meet with council to discuss what their plans are.
That was going to be my suggestion, rather than trying to convene an assembly of 20 people.
And so if council would prefer to meet with the school board, Dr. French is prepared to ask that question of the school board. If it satisfies your needs that Dr. French come to a meeting, she's also willing to do that as well.
I just feel that we need to have a conversation if she wants to be the one representing that and then taking back any concerns we have. I would just like to know that there's going to be a closed loop at some point. We're the two of us are the governing bodies in the township, and we're both impacting the residents dramatically with the projects we're doing. So I think we should talk every now and then.
Yeah, I think that, if we could get a lot of the information if Dr. French would like to speak with us, but I think that the rest of the school board would then miss whatever interaction there is. And as Mrs. Merrill suggests, we are the two governing bodies in the township, and I think it would be very nice if we're in sync on things. So I would second the motion that we have a joint meeting, but if that's not possible, then it would be very nice to hear from Dr. French.
Okay.
I agree with Mr. Lewis.
Which was?
I don't think we need to have a meeting with the school board. I think if she comes in and answers some of our questions.
That's fine.
And acts as an intermediary, that's why are we going to inconvenience everybody trying to put together something in the summer with, I don't know how many school board members.
Well, if it's possible, it's possible. If it's not, it's not.
Well, they're planning to open school on the 19th of August. So
yes,
Yeah.
It's coming quickly.
Okay. All right.
I do have one last thing, Mr. Hall, sitting at your desk, is a proclamation declaring July 20th, Myra Linick Day. July 20th will be Mrs. Linick's last day as library director of the Peters Township Library. I think what she's been able to accomplish in her 5 years there is truly remarkable, and I think it's fitting that, in fact, we designate that day to commemorate her service.
So moved.
Second. All right, all in favor? Aye. All right, I think that that's well-deserved honor for Mrs. Olenek. Okay. Any items for the next agenda? We have a executive session?
Yes, we do.
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's a personnel matter. Other than that, we are adjourned.